The morning the survey stakes appeared in my father's south field, I knew something was wrong before I knew anything at all. Little orange flags on wire, marching in a straight line across ground that had grown our corn for 100 years. Ground my grandfather cleared, and my father worked and I worked beside him from the time I could walk. I stood at the fence in the grey dawn with my coffee going cold, and I counted those flags, and I felt the way you feel when you come home and the furniture has been moved an inch, and you cannot yet say how. Only that someone has been in your house. Someone had been in our house. My own brother, it turned out. And those little orange flags were the first thing I ever saw of the quiet, careful theft of my family's entire world. My name does not matter as much as the land does, but you can call me Cal, and the land is called the Merrick Place, 480 acres in the bottomlands along the river, and it has been in my family for 104 years. And 2 months before those stakes appeared, my older brother Randall, holding our father's power of attorney, while our father slipped away into a fog of dementia, had signed a contract to sell the entire farm to a developer for a subdivision, pocketed the arrangement for himself, and told the rest of the family that Dad had wanted it, that Dad needed the money for his care, and that I, the son who had stayed and worked that land my whole life, had no say in the matter, and never really had. But here is the one thing my brother Randall did not know, the thing that was going to bring his whole careful scheme down around his ears. 12 years earlier, back when our father was sharp as a tack and knew exactly what kind of man his older son was becoming, Dad had done something quiet and wise that Randall never learned about, something that meant the farm was not Randall's to sell, had never been Randall's to sell, and that every stake in that field was standing on ground my father had already protected from exactly this. Randall thought he was holding all the cards. He did not know our father had dealt him out of the game a decade before he ever tried to play it. Before we get into this, if you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And while you are here, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every one of them, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to 104 years of Merricks on the same river bottom, and to 2 brothers who grew up on the same land and grew into 2 very different men. I was raised on that farm outside a town called Alderbend, maybe 3,000 people, in the kind of farm country where the land is the family, and the family is the land, and you cannot really tell where one stops and the other starts. My great-grandfather bought that bottom ground in 1920, when it was half swamp, and drained it and worked it, and my grandfather after him and my father after him, and it was understood the way things are understood in a farm family without ever quite being said, that the Merrick Place would go on. Though we were not so much its owners as its keepers, holding it in trust for the ones who came before, and the ones who would come after. My father, Owen Merrick, believed that with his whole soul. He used to stand at the edge of the south field at the end of a long day, and he would say, not to me exactly, more to the land itself, we are just passing through, Cal, the land stays. I did not understand it as a boy. I understand it now, better than I ever wanted to. Let me give you one memory of my father and that land, because it is the memory I held on to through the whole ugly business. When I was maybe 12, we had a bad flood. The river came up over the bottoms and drowned half the corn, a year's work gone in 3 days of rain, and I remember being furious, a boy's fury at the unfairness of it. And my father took me out in the truck when the water went down, and we walked the ruined field together, and I expected him to be as angry as I was. But he was not. He crouched down and he put his hand flat on the wet black mud, the mud that had just cost us everything, and he said, "This dirt has fed 6 generations of somebody, Cal, and it drowned our corn this year and it'll grow it back next year, because it was here before the Merricks and it'll be here after us. And our whole job is just to not wreck it and to hand it on." I did not get it then. I was 12 and I wanted my corn. But that sentence, "our whole job is just to hand it on," became the bedrock of my entire life, and it is exactly the thing my brother Randall never once felt in his bones, and it is the difference that made him able to do what he did. To me, the land was a trust handed down. To Randall, it was an asset waiting to be liquidated. Same field, same father, 2 completely different men. There were 2 of us, Randall and me. Randall is 4 years older, and I want to be fair to him, because a story like this is worthless if I make my brother a cartoon, and because we were close once, genuinely close, 2 farm boys with a creek and 100 acres of woods and a whole world to ourselves. But even then, there was a difference in us that time only widened. Randall wanted out. He wanted the city, the money, the life that did not smell like diesel and manure. And there is nothing wrong with that. Plenty of good men leave the farm. Randall left at 18 and did well for himself in the city, in business, in the kind of work where a handshake means less than a signature. And a signature means less than what you can get away with. And over the years I watched my brother become a man who measured everything by what it was worth and nothing by what it meant. I stayed. I never wanted anything but that land. There was a moment, years before any of this, that I think about now, when I should have seen where Randall was headed. Our mother had passed and we were going through her things, and there was almost nothing of value, some furniture, some jewelry that was more sentiment than money. And I watched my brother, even then, appraising it, his eyes moving over our mother's things, pricing them, while I was holding her old apron and trying not to cry. And Randall caught me looking, and he had the grace back then to look a little embarrassed, and he said something about how somebody had to be practical. Somebody had to be practical. I heard that sentence again years later in his expensive kitchen, about the farm, and I understood that it had always been Randall's whole philosophy, the flag he flew over every act of coldness, that caring about what things mean is sentiment, and caring about what things are worth is being practical, being an adult. It took me most of my life to understand that he had it exactly backwards, that the practical thing, the truly grown-up thing, is to know the difference between a price and a value, and to protect the things that have a value beyond any price. My father knew the difference. That is the whole reason there was still a farm to fight over, and I knew the difference. Randall never did, and I have come to believe he never will, and that is not a triumph to me. It is the saddest part of the whole story, that my brother spent his life so fluent in the price of everything, and so blind to the worth of anything that he could look at 4 generations of his own family's land and see only a number. I worked beside my father until my own hands looked like his, and I married a farm girl named Sarah and raised 2 kids in the same farmhouse I grew up in, and I assumed, the way you assume the sun will come up, that I would work that ground until I handed it to my own children, keepers passing it to keepers, the way it had always been. My father started slipping when he was 78. It is a particular cruelty, watching a sharp man go foggy, and my dad had been the sharpest man I knew. A man who could tell you the yield of every field for 30 years back, and the exact day he bought every piece of equipment in the barn. To watch him stand in the kitchen and not remember why he had come in, to watch him call me by his own dead brother's name, to watch the fog roll in a little further every month, it broke something in me that has not healed. And because I was there, because I had always been there, I became his caregiver along with everything else, me and Sarah, feeding him and watching him and keeping him safe on the farm he had spent his whole life on, because leaving that land would have killed him faster than the disease. Randall came at Christmas. Randall called sometimes, and then, when Dad got bad enough that the legal and financial matters needed handling, Randall, the businessman, the one who was so good with that kind of thing, offered to take the power of attorney to handle Dad's affairs so that I could focus on the hands-on care. And I was grateful. God help me, I was grateful. I thought my brother was finally stepping up. I handed him the keys to everything and thanked him for it. I have had to make my peace with that, and it took a long time. I want to tell you what that caregiving was actually like, not for sympathy, but because it is the labor Randall would later erase, and you cannot understand the theft without understanding what he was stealing from. There is a stretch of caring for a parent with dementia that no one warns you about, where they are still strong in the body but gone in the mind, and you cannot leave them alone for a minute, because they will wander out into a field in their socks in January, looking for cattle they sold in 1985. I did not sleep a full night for the better part of 2 years. Sarah and I took shifts. I learned to answer to my uncle's name and to my grandfather's name without correcting him, because correcting him only frightened him. I learned to steer him gently away from the machinery he no longer knew was dangerous. I fed him when he forgot how, and there were nights I sat on the bathroom floor with my father, both of us worn out, and I held his hand and told him about the corn, because talking about the field still reached him when nothing else did. That is what I was doing, while Randall, 2 hours away, was quietly arranging to sell the very fields that were the last language my father and I still shared. That is the labor Randall would stand up and call sentimentality. There was nothing sentimental about it. It was the hardest and holiest work of my life, and my brother used the fact that I was busy doing it as the cover for robbing us both. Because here is what I did not understand, what I was too tired and too trusting and too deep in the daily labor of caring for my dying father to see. To Randall, our father's decline was not a grief. It was an opportunity. It was 480 acres of increasingly valuable river-bottom land, sitting under the control of an old man who no longer knew what day it was, with a power of attorney in Randall's own pocket, and a brother me, too busy changing our father's world to notice what was being done to it. Randall looked at the fog rolling into our father's mind, and he did not see the end of the best man we knew. He saw a window, and he began, quietly, from 2 hours away, to move. I did not find out the way you are supposed to find out. I found out from orange flags in a field. When I saw those survey stakes, I called the number on the little sign by the road, the one I had not even noticed going up, and a receptionist at a development company, cheerful, told me they were doing preliminary work on the Merrick parcel ahead of the closing, and did I have a question about the project. The closing. I stood in my father's driveway with the phone in my hand, and the word closing going off in my head like a slow bomb. And I drove straight to Randall's, 2 hours, not trusting myself to do it by phone. And Randall, sitting in his nice kitchen in his nice house, did not even have the grace to be ashamed. He was ready for me. He had a whole speech, calm and reasonable and lawyered, about how Dad's care was going to cost a fortune, about how the farm was a dying business anyway, about how he as power of attorney had a duty to act in Dad's financial interest, and how selling the land was the responsible thing, the grown-up thing, and how he understood I was emotional about it, but that emotions do not pay for memory care. And then he said the thing I will never forgive, the thing that told me exactly who my brother had become. He said, "Cal, I know you think of that place as yours, but legally it was never yours, it was Dad's, and now it's my call." That was the moment my brother stopped being my brother and became the man in this story. I stood in his kitchen a long moment after he said it, and I looked at him, really looked at him, my big brother, the boy I had built forts with in the creek woods, and I tried to find him in there, and I could not. There was a stranger wearing his face, a stranger in an expensive sweater in an expensive kitchen, explaining to me with a lawyer's patience why selling our father's life out from under a family was the mature thing to do. I asked him one question. I asked him, "Randall, does Dad know? Does Dad on a clear day know you're selling the farm?" And Randall's eyes flicked away just for a second, just once, and he said something about how Dad wasn't really capable of understanding these things anymore, and in that little flick of his eyes, I saw the whole truth, that he had not asked our father, that he had waited precisely until our father could not be asked, that the fog was not an obstacle to Randall's plan, the fog was the plan. I did not shout. I have thought a lot about why I did not shout, and I think it is because shouting would have been for me, and I understood standing in that kitchen that this was not going to be won by me. It was going to be won by our father somehow, if it could be won at all. So I just looked at my brother one more time and I said, "All right, Randall," and I drove the 2 hours home and I did not yet know how, but I knew I was not going to let the last thing my father built be sold by the son who never loved it. I want to be honest with you about what those next weeks did to me, because these stories skip the part where it nearly breaks you, and it nearly broke me. Because Randall was persuasive, and grief and exhaustion make you doubt yourself, and part of the family believed him. An uncle told me I needed to be realistic. A cousin said Randall was just doing the hard, unsentimental thing that somebody had to do, and there I was, the son who had stayed, who had drained our father's fields, and then, at the end, cared for our father's body, suddenly cast as the sentimental one, the emotional one, the one who could not accept hard financial reality, while the brother who had left and come back only to sell the family out from under us wore the mask of the responsible adult. Randall had not just moved to take the land, he had taken the story, painted himself the grown-up and me the child, and for a few terrible weeks it looked like he was going to get away with all of it, the land and the story both. I sat in my father's kitchen, in the house my great-grandfather built, and I did the math on being the last Merrick to ever work that ground, and I felt a despair I have no words for. The worst of it was the loneliness of being disbelieved. I could stand losing to Randall. What I could not stand was the way the family started looking at me, like I was the problem, like I was the greedy one who could not accept reality, when I was the one who had given up everything to stay and care for our father and the land both. My uncle, my father's own brother, sat me down and told me kindly that he knew I loved the place, but that Randall was a smart man who understood money, and that maybe I should trust my brother's judgment. Trust my brother's judgment. I wanted to laugh and I wanted to scream. Randall had done the thing that clever men always do, which is get his story out first, and a first story is a powerful thing. It becomes the water everyone else is swimming in before the truth ever gets its boots on. And I had no proof yet, only my word and my grief, and a man with only his word and his grief going up against a smooth brother with a lawyer and a reasonable-sounding plan looks exactly like a sore loser. I understood in those weeks that I could not win this by being right. Being right was not enough. I needed the proof, the thing that would make the truth undeniable to a family that had already half decided I was the difficult one. I did not know yet that my father had left that proof for me 12 years before in a lawyer's filing cabinet, waiting. And then, on one of my father's clearer evenings, and even deep in the fog he still had clearer evenings, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting with Dad at the kitchen table, and I was low, lower than I let him see, and he must have felt it the way he always could, and out of the fog apropos of nothing, in a moment of the old sharpness surfacing like a fish rising in a pond, my father looked at me and said, "Clear as a bell, Cal. Did you ever go see Harlan Webb about the trust?" And then the fog rolled back in and he was asking about a tractor we sold in 1994. But I sat there frozen because I did not know what he was talking about. Harlan Webb. The trust. Harlan Webb had been our family's lawyer in Alder Bend for 40 years, a friend of my father's, long retired now, and I had no idea what trust my father meant. But the word had come out of the fog with such certainty, such old sharpness, that I knew it was real, that some clear-minded version of my father from years ago was reaching through the disease to tell me something. So the next morning, I went to find Harlan Webb. Harlan Webb was in his 80s, retired to a little house in town, and when I told him who I was, Owen Merrick's boy Cal, his old face lit up, and then, as I told him what was happening, the light went out of it, and something harder came in. And Harlan Webb said, "Son, sit down. There is something you need to know, and something your father was very clear he wanted done, if this day ever came." And then he told me the thing that turned this whole story, the thing my brother Randall never knew, the thing that made every one of those orange steaks worthless. 12 years earlier, Harlan told me, back when my father was 70 and sharp as a razor, and could see exactly which way the wind was blowing with his 2 sons, Owen Merrick had come to him privately and had done a very deliberate, very careful thing. He had placed the entire farm, all 480 acres, into an irrevocable trust. A trust, Harlan explained, is not like a will, and it is not like ownership you can just hand off with a power of attorney. When my father put the land into that irrevocable trust, the farm stopped being a personal possession that could be sold on a whim by whoever held Dad's power of attorney. It became something protected, held under the terms my father set, and my father had set those terms with a wisdom that took my breath away. The trust named both Randall and me as beneficiaries equally, which was fair. That was my father all over. But the trust also required that the land could not be sold without the agreement of both trustees, and my father had named, as the 2 trustees, not himself alone, but himself and me, Cal, the son who stayed. My father, 12 years ago, in full possession of his mind, had built a lock on that gate that required my key to open. Precisely, Harlan said, because your father told me, and I am quoting him, Harlan, "Randall's a good boy, but he does not love the land, and someday he is going to want to turn it into money, and I will not have it sold out from under Cal and out from under this family. So we are going to fix it, so it cannot be." I sat in Harlan Webb's little living room and I wept. and I'm not ashamed to tell you that, because my father, the sharp, clear, strong version of him from 12 years before the fog, had seen this exact day coming. He had looked at his own 2 sons and understood with a clarity that both broke my heart and saved us, exactly what Randall would try to do when the time came, and exactly how it would hurt me, and he had quietly, lovingly, built a wall to stop it, and then he had carried the secret of that wall through 12 years and into the fog, holding on to it, until one clear evening at the kitchen table he reached through the disease to hand me the key. Did you ever go see Harlan Webb about the trust? My father had protected the land and protected me from beyond the reach of his own failing mind. Randall, holding the power of attorney, thought he held the farm. But you cannot sell with a power of attorney what is locked inside an irrevocable trust that requires another trustee's signature, and Randall was not a trustee, and I was, and I had never signed anything, and I never would. His entire sale was built on sand. It was void. It had always been void. He just did not know it because he had never known about the trust, because our father, seeing exactly this coming, had never told him. Harlan told me more that afternoon, sitting in his little living room, and every word of it undid me a little further. He told me that my father had been troubled that day, 12 years ago, not about money, but about his sons. He had told Harlan in that meeting that he loved both his boys the same, but that he could not pretend he did not see the difference in them, and that it grieved him to plan around his own son's weakness, but that a father who sees a flood coming and does not build the levee is no father at all. Harlan said my father had specifically worried about this exact scenario, that someday he might lose his mind, and that Randall, holding his affairs, might sell the land and cut me out, and that he was not going to leave that possibility open. And so he had built the trust and made me co-trustee, not to reward me over Randall, Harlan was careful to say. The trust split the benefit of the land evenly between us. That was fair, that was Dad. He made me co-trustee because he knew I would never let the land be sold, and Randall, given the chance, might. It was not favoritism. It was knowing his children. And then Harlan told me the last thing, the thing that broke me completely. He said my father had made him promise something. He had said, "Harlan, do not tell Cal about this unless the day comes that he needs it, because I do not want him going through life feeling like he has to guard the place against his own brother. Let him just live and farm and love his brother. Only if Randall reaches for it, only then, tell Cal what I did." My father had carried that secret and that grief alone for 12 years, so that I would not have to carry the suspicion of my own brother through my good years. He only let me feel it when it was already true. Now here is the part where I want you to understand the discipline, because it is the whole lesson. I had it. Sitting in Harlan Webb's living room, I had the thing that would blow my brother's scheme to pieces, and every furious bone in my body wanted to drive the 2 hours to Randall's nice kitchen and throw it in his smug face. I did not do it, because Harlan, wise old lawyer that he was, told me something I have never forgotten. He said, "Cal, do not warn him. A man who is warned has time to maneuver, to lie, to muddy the water, to find some angle. Let him keep believing he is winning. Let him walk all the way to the closing table thinking he has gotten away with it, because the truth, brought at the right moment in the right way, does not give him room to wriggle." So I did the hardest thing. I said nothing to Randall. I let him keep planning his closing. I let him keep wearing his responsible adult mask in front of the family. And Harlan and I, quietly, went to work doing it right, the lawful way. The way that would not just stop the sale but end my brother's whole scheme completely. We did several things calmly, in order. Harlan pulled the trust documents, the original, properly executed, 12 years old, ironclad, recorded and real. We established in writing the exact legal situation, that the land was held in an irrevocable trust, that a power of attorney over my father as an individual gave Randall no authority whatsoever over trust property, that any sale required both trustees, that I was a trustee, and that I did not consent, and never would. And then, rather than ambush Randall, which felt satisfying but was not smart, Harlan advised that we go to the one place the whole thing had to be resolved anyway, which was the closing itself and the developer's title work. Because here is a thing about selling land that men like Randall, So clever about people. Forget about paper. You cannot actually sell real estate without clean title, and title gets checked, and the moment the developer's title company did its work, or the moment we placed the trust and my non-consent on the record, that sale was going to die. Because no title company on earth will ensure the sale of land the seller does not have the legal authority to sell. Randall had a contract. He did not have the one thing that makes a contract into a sale, which was the actual legal right to hand over the land. And he had no idea, because he had never known about the wall our father built 12 years before. I will not pretend the unwinding was dramatic, because real justice usually is not. It is paperwork and phone calls and the slow grinding of the law. But it was total. When the trust hit the record, when the developer's people understood that the man who had signed their contract had no authority to sell the land, that it was locked in an irrevocable trust requiring a trustee who would never sign, the whole deal collapsed. The developer, who had done nothing wrong and had simply been dealing with a man who was selling something he did not have the right to sell, walked away and, I gather, was not pleased with Randall at all, because Randall had cost them time and money and possibly more, having represented that he could deliver land he could not deliver. The survey stakes came out of the south field. The closing never happened because it never legally could have. And Randall, my brother who had been so certain, so smug, so sure that legally it was never yours, Cal, and now it's my call, learned all at once that legally it had been protected for 12 years by the very father he was trying to rob, and that the little brother he had dealt out of the game had been holding the only key the whole time, and had not even known it until our father, from the depths of the fog, reached out and put it in his hand. Randall called me when it all came apart, and for the first time in the whole affair his voice was not smooth. He was angry, and then, underneath the anger, I heard something that might have been fear, because his whole scheme had not just failed, it had exposed him. Because here is the other thing that came out of it. When you take a power of attorney over your father, and you try to use it to enrich yourself by selling protected family land out from under your sibling, that is not just a failed deal. That is a serious breach of the fiduciary duty a power of attorney carries. A duty to act in the principal's interest and not your own. And it is the kind of thing that can have real legal consequences and can get a man removed from that power of attorney entirely, which is exactly what happened. With Harlan's guidance and with the whole scheme now documented, Randall was removed as our father's power of attorney, and I, the son who had been there all along, took over the responsibility of caring for our father's affairs the way our father, in his wisdom, had clearly wanted, since he had made me the trustee of the thing he loved most. Randall did not go to prison. I want to be honest, it did not go that far. And part of me, the tired part, was glad, because he is still my brother, and our father would not have wanted that. But he was exposed, completely, in front of the whole family, as the man who had tried to sell his dying father's farm for his own pocket. And there is a kind of justice in that exposure that no courtroom improves upon. The uncle who told me to be realistic, the cousin who called Randall the responsible one, they went very quiet. The story Randall had stolen, the responsible adult story, our father's trust took back and handed to me, from 12 years in the past, along with the land. I want to describe the moment the family understood, because it was quiet, and it was complete. There was no shouting scene, no dramatic confrontation. Harlan simply sent the family a plain letter, at my request, laying out the facts, that the farm had been in an irrevocable trust for 12 years, placed there by our father in full health, that it could not be sold as Randall had tried to sell it, and that Randall had attempted to sell trust property he had no authority over, while holding a power of attorney he was legally bound to use only in our father's interest. Just the facts, on paper, from the family lawyer who had known us all our lives. And the effect of that plain letter was like a window opening in a stuffy room. My uncle called me, and he did not quite apologize, men of his generation rarely can, but his voice had changed completely, and he said, "Your father was a smart man, Cal, smarter than any of us knew, and I heard in it everything he could not say directly." The cousin who had called Randall responsible went silent, and has been a little ashamed around me ever since. And Randall, who had spent weeks as the family's clear-eyed adult, was revealed in one plain letter, as a man who had tried to rob his dying father and his own brother, and there is no coming back from that in a family, no spin, no reasonable-sounding plan. He had built his whole standing in the family on being the smart one, the responsible one, and our father, 12 years dead sharp, had quietly built the thing that would one day expose him as neither. I want to tell you the part that matters more than beating Randall, because by the end, I found I cared about it far more than I cared about him. My father lived another year after that, and he never fully understood in the fog everything that had happened, but he understood enough. On his clear evenings, I would tell him the farm was safe, that it was in the trust, that no one could sell it, that it would go to the family, and every single time, even when he could not remember my name, something in his face would ease, some deep old worry would let go, because the thing he had spent his whole life keeping, the thing he had reached out of the fog to protect, was safe. And somehow, in whatever part of him the disease had not taken, he knew it. He died in the farmhouse his grandfather built, on the land he had saved twice, once with his labor and once with his foresight, and I was holding his hand, and the last of the Merrick place was not lost on his watch or mine. My kids work that ground now on the weekends, the 5th generation, and my daughter has started saying she wants to farm it for real someday. And I have to leave the room when she says it, the same way my father used to go quiet at the edge of the south field. We are just passing through, Cal. The land stays. It stayed. He made sure it stayed. There is one evening I want to tell you about, near the end, because it is the one I hold on to. It was late summer, the corn tall and green in the south field where the orange stakes had stood, and I got my father out to the edge of that field in the last of the light, in his wheelchair by then, and he was deep in the fog that evening, had not said a clear word all day, but I turned his chair so he could see the field, the corn coming in strong, the field that was safe now, that would always be safe, and I told him, "Dad, look, the corn's good this year, and the place is protected, nobody can ever sell it. You fixed it so nobody can ever sell it." And I do not know how much he understood in words. But he lifted his hand, his old hand that had worked that ground for 60 years, and he laid it flat in the air toward the field, the exact gesture he had made when I was 12, and he pressed his palm into the flood mud, and something eased in his face, some deepest worry letting go, and he was quiet and peaceful in a way he had not been in weeks. I think in whatever part of him the disease could not reach, the part that had reached out of the fog to say Harlan Webb, the trust he knew. He knew the land was safe. He had spent his whole life keeping it twice over, and on that evening at the edge of the field, I got to tell him he had won. He died a few weeks later in the farmhouse, and I was holding that same hand. I keep the trust document in a fireproof box now, the 12-year-old paper my father signed in Harlan Webb's office back when he was strong, and sometimes I take it out and look at his signature, firm and sure, and I think about what it means. It means my father knew his older son's heart, and grieved it and loved him anyway, and protected the rest of us from it, all at the same time, quietly, for 12 years, without ever saying a word, carrying it into the dark of his own failing mind and holding on to it until he could pass it to me. That is not just an estate document. That is the last and greatest act of a father's love, disguised as paperwork. So let me leave you with what my father taught me, from 12 years before I needed it, and then I will let you go. The people who would take what matters most from you, even your own blood, they count on catching you unprotected, in a moment of grief and weakness and trust, with a power of attorney in their pocket and a reasonable-sounding story on their lips. But there is a wisdom, an old and patient wisdom, that sees these things coming long before they arrive and builds the wall while the sky is still clear. My father built that wall 12 years early, when no one saw the storm coming but him. So if you love something, and you love the people who will come after you, do not wait for the storm. Do the quiet, wise, unglamorous thing now, while your mind is clear and your hand is sure. Protect it in a way that cannot be undone by whoever holds your keys at the end. Because the greatest revenge my father ever took on my brother's greed was one he set in motion 12 years before Randall ever reached for the land, with nothing but a lawyer, a document, and a clear-eyed love that refused to pretend his own son was better than he was. Randall thought the farm was his call. Our father had already made the only call that mattered. A decade before, and it was to keep the land and the family safe from exactly the man his son became. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And tell me honestly, has your family ever come apart over land or money after someone got sick? And did the truth protect the ones who deserved it? I read every single comment, and I want to hear it. Take care of yourselves. Protect what matters while your mind is clear, and I will see you in the next one.